Busy month.
Either of you singers or dancers? Or we're looking for like a lead-in act. Would either of you want to perform?
My daughter is getting 8 inches of snow right now.
Where is she?
Missouri.
Oh, no.
Kid.
The snow.
We're not supposed to get any, are we?
I hope not. We usually get, that system usually comes this way, but it may be rain by the time it gets to us.
Everything is set up, so at 6 o'clock we can start.
Okay, we have
I'm
about
starting now?
No, we have
2 minutes.
2 more minutes, okay. All right,
But everything is up and going for everyone.
Great.
okay.
You turned me on, didn't you?
Everyone can hear
Turn
around
me
the
back
street.
on.
I found that I had to switch things around, because if I hit it over this way, I'll probably miss it, so I'll put it over here.
You're
On the left hand.
left-handed.
That's right.
It is 6 o'clock.
Well, good afternoon, evening, it's now 6 o'clock, I believe, and we were called to order our meeting to have a moment of silent prayer, please. Amen. This time we have the announcements by our secretary.
Thank you, Reverend Edwards. We do have a few announcements. Just wanted to mention that Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice had a town hall on February 8th, and it was very well attended. I think they had over 270, if I'm not mistaken, attendees, and it was on Black history in Delaware, and it went very well. And it was recorded for anybody who may want to look at
Okay,
it.
good.
I'll send the link. They also most recently put out, can I borrow this? They put this out, I believe, quarterly or every 2 months.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Anyway, this comes out every so often, and I think this is the second one
Yeah.
that's been out for, and it has very good stories about Black life. It's called Black Voices.
You forgot to mention that you were part of the amazing program that, that they gave on Lewes.
Thank you.
You did a beautiful job.
I wasn't going to mention it.
You made us proud.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
want
I
that to be
enjoyed
the
it.
record.
I enjoyed it. Let me make sure I get over there.
Oh, thank you.
And also, we have a couple things. We have a reappointment of 2 members of the commission. That is Mr. Lima Lott and myself have been reappointed to the commission.
Oh, wonderful.
Great.
We have another announcement where Lewes Historical Society has an upcoming walking tour, Finding Their Voices in African American History, Legacy of Lewes walking tour that is coming starting February 26th. And also, so more information will be coming out about that, but I wanted everybody to be aware This is just a pre-announcement, but they will be doing a press release on that as well. And let's see if I'm missing anything. We do have a proclamation that was from the Office of the Mayor for Black History Month, February 2022, and I'd like to read that if I may.
Okay.
Black History Month, February 2022, Black Health and Wellness. Whereas the city of Lewes is a community of diversity, and during Black History Month, we celebrate the many achievements and contributions made by African Americans to our economic, spiritual, cultural, and political development. And whereas Black History Month grew out of the establishment in 1926 of Negro History Week by Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And whereas the 2022 national theme for the observance is Black History, Health, and Wellness, and takes a look at how American health care is often underserved, the African American community, and whereas Black Health and Wellness acknowledges the legacy of not only Black scholars and medical practitioners in Western medicine, but also other ways of knowing, such as naturopaths, midwives, doulas, birth workers, herbalists, etc., through the African diaspora. It considers activities, rituals, and initiatives that Black communities have done to foster good health. Black people have embarked on self-determination, mutual aid, and social support initiatives to build hospitals, medical and nursing schools, and community clinics to promote wellness. And whereas the observance of Black History Month calls our attention to the continued need to combat racism and build a society that lives up to its democratic ideas, and whereas the city of Lewes is proud to honor the history and contributions of African Americans in our community throughout Delaware and the United States, resolved in recognition of African Americans past and present in our community, I, Theodore W. Becker, Mayor of the City of Lewes, do hereby proclaim the month of February 2022 to be Black History Month. I encourage all citizens to celebrate our diverse heritage and culture and continue our efforts to create a world that is more just, peaceful, and prosperous for all. Theodore Becker, Mayor, Lewes, Delaware, dated February 1st, 2022. We'd like to thank the mayor for the proclamation in the city. And I believe I have gone through my list. And just to mention that Reverend McCafferty is excused.
Are there any other announcements anyone would like to make before we move on? If not, you have heard the minutes, can we get a motion to accept
So
or
moved.
approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been so moved and second that we will accept the minutes that as they had been read. All in favor says aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it, and so it is carried. So next we would have the Lewis African American Heritage Commission minutes.
No, we just had that, Reverend. You just did that, I believe.
Or you want,
We're
we'll
going-
move on to the Juneteenth update and possible actions on that this time.
Bill, you want to say anything about Juneteenth so far?
Just that we are moving forward and putting, and Trina, I'm going to say it, and Lima are doing it, getting a program and just getting it in order, and I'm excited about some things that are happening and are coming together. I do want to say that. I think Trina might be a little more specific, but I do see us moving forward, and I think it's going to be a wonderful occasion.
Yes, I have a few updates. Our event is going to be Saturday, June 25th, 2022, from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. It will we will have a rain date of Sunday from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. That is only if it's a total washout.
Oh,
That's only.
total.
So if it rains a little bit Friday night and a little bit Saturday, we are moving on. Only if it's a torrential downpour will we delay.
That sounds good.
But we have, the team has worked with Miss Anne Marie and Miss Kayla and the Parks Commission. We've talked about whatever permits were necessary for the vendors and for outdoor amplification as necessary. We have been doing marketing and advertising, preparing for that. And Ms. Kayla,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Kayla can pull up some of the marketing that we will do. We have a letter. Oh, okay, I'll do that one first.
Are you sure? I have the letter.
Okay, we have a letter that we've put out, very colorful we've worked on this, and Ms. Kayla has been very patient we've been going back and forth for a couple weeks on the letter, making sure we included everything we needed to include. Next, Ms. Kayla, what do you have next?
You can do the flyer, the application.
We have the flyer here that we will be putting out, and we have the application for the vendors. All of this will be going through social media, mail, text, email, whatever way we can to support Juneteenth. And we've already had some hits because I've put out already some feelers out, so we're getting that together. Set up in coordination, we are coordinating that with the Parks and Recs team. We know where the food trucks are going to be, we know where the vendors are going to be, and so that's moving on. We've contacted the city police department and made them aware in case we need traffic control or what have you. And the farmers market has volunteered to assist us in any way possible with their tables and chairs and tents. So we are very happy that we are coming together with that, and volunteers as well. The entertainment, we have several entertainment. We have Miss Christy Taylor. We're looking at trying to get the Sankofa dancers, but we do have the Nanticoke Indian dancers. We're looking at a gospel group to participate as well. Mike Hines in the look. We have him, and we are considering if we can do the logistics. We are considering having a parade. We may not be able to parade downtown, but we can truly parade around the park, around the circle of the park. So that's under consideration. And many vendors, we've already had food vendors and retail vendors and organizations already commit to attending, so that is a great thing. And we'll be working on the program as well and looking for volunteers. And again, we've already mentioned the contingency plan is if it's raining in the park, we'll move everything to the parking lot. Mr. Colick will be working with the school to try to coordinate that as well. And if it's a washout, we will have it the next day. And that's my report.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Oh, one more thing. Sorry, I forgot this. We are looking at having some giveaways, and I was able to go online and find a bag that may be under consideration, and a couple other things. That's just hand sanitizer, a lapel pin, a bookmark, pencil and bracelet, and a water bottle. So I was able to go through a company to acquire these, and they sent these as samples for free. So and so we may be looking at some giveaways, which is we're trying to mimic the Juneteenth program that's in Georgetown already at the Richard Allen School. And we decided not to have our Juneteenth on that same weekend because we want to participate in theirs and we want them to participate in ours as well. So we are the following weekend.
Sounds good.
That's it.
Any questions for him? That sounds good. Hopefully. Okay. Black History Month, we have a special guest, Mr. Lewes Riley, and we are.
Want to introduce him?
Yes, sir. You would introduce
Okay.
Black History Month.
Good evening again. It really,
My apologies, Mr. Collett. Terry Lotman asked for the date again for Juneteenth. She missed it.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's June 25th, Saturday, June 25th, from 1 to 6 p.m.
That was the only one. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, yes, sir.
good evening again. It really is my pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. Lewes E. Riley and his wife, Lonnie. And I can remember being a little kid, Lewes visiting my house. He was good friends with my uncle, and I guess he's done something. Some people say you can't come home again, but he's traveled the world and now has come back home to Lewes, and so I think that's quite special. Lonnie was a long-time educator in mathematics in the Indian River School District, and have a daughter, Catherine, who is a college professor at Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. So Lewes is a storyteller, and I'm excited to introduce him. So that's yours.
Wonderful.
Good evening, Council. My name is Lewes Edward Riley, and there's a reason I put the middle name in there. And I want to clear this up this evening and hope you'll disseminate this information that I'm going to relate to you. For many years in this little town, they always called me Lewisy. Lewisy. And that's what, even some said that, oh, I didn't know that wasn't your name. It took me 70 years to come to the grand conclusion on why they called me Lewisy. Well, there was about 5 people in Lewes at the time. The first name was Lewis. Louis Du Bois, Louis Marshall, Mr. Louis Stewart, his son Ad, who was also another Lewis, and Mr. Louis Mall. My middle name was Edward E. Louis E. That's how to distinguish me from all the others. Never knew that. Anyway, thanks for inviting me this evening. I'll start from my birth. Some things that have gone from the scenes. For instance, you know where the Reeves Monument is, I'm sure. Just to the left of it
Tell us, sir.
is where the cemetery is at.
Okay.
And that's where my midwife lived. Her name was Miss Annie Burton. She's the one that brought me here. In later years, I was to find out that she delivered a lot of black and white babies. And I understand there might be a plaque or something somewhere in Beebe Hospital that would indicate that. It was around 6 or 7 in the morning, and my Aunt Edith, who lived at 508 Pollocktown Road, had to come over and start a fire. And of course, I had my little special bassinet, which is a drawer that pulled out and puts it in. I remember it was real hard sleeping that little thing. Now I don't remember. Anyway, the other part of that story is I grew up without a father. He died 7 months before I was born. He died in June, and I was born that January. I got here. And I understand later years it was a tragic death. He'd been fighting or something. They fell in his head on a rock down by a lady we called Aunt Mary. And he died in Beebe Hospital. There's been a transition that has occurred in this past year. It's one of the happiest days of my life. 2 from the Historical Society, Donnell and Pam, have discovered that I'm related to 29 people in the old cemetery that's in my family, not counting all the others. Just by coincidence, they happened to be walking by one day, going to the beach, and they decided to walk up into the cemetery. And there was a tombstone that said George Riley. And they was wondering, and later on I was interviewed by WRDE, and they walked into the church, St. George up here. And they asked me if that was one of my relatives. I said, yeah, probably a cousin. It ended up being my great-grandfather. And I just relayed to Bill that apparently his grandfather might also be buried in there. They just found a colleague buried in that cemetery. So it's been one of the best years. It's almost as if I'm reborn.
Right.
Such pride in knowing about my family. Some of them, of course, were criminals, but that's the truth. But that pride has really started a little over 8 months ago. Anyway, I grew up in Lewes on Pilot Town Road, we called it, but at those days it was New Road, but we never called it New Road. We called it Nassau Road, because it was a road that led to Nassau, and it was a dirt road. And I was angered at people who came here was calling it New Road. Well, I hadn't had the original deed from where my father had bought a piece of land across the street on New Road from my grandmom. And it had on there New Road. I said, oh, the people that came here were right. So, those things I've learned in the past few years. I had to walk to school every day. Of course, I went by that cemetery many times. And when the northeast wind coming, we would cut through the field where Reverend Edwards Church is at right now. There was a path that went through, and we used to cut across that and then went across the field to go through the homes. Bill's family lived across the street from me. His uncle, very close to me. And there was some other young men, there was 5 of us, we called ourselves the Fab Five. We were always the explorers. We went everywhere in this town. In the marshland, over to the dunes, you name it, we were there. And the great thing I can say about it, no one ever told us not to. So despite what some think, I was never mistreated in Lewes, even though it was Jim Crow and segregated, I was never mistreated. And I've said that many times. And the relationship I had with the family down in Pilot Town, black and white, I grew up with a young man named Kenny Booker. I was over at his house, he was over to mine. What I didn't understand was, why did he go to one school and I had to go to the other? Never understood that. Mother never told me that. Not many others ever mentioned that. So growing up in Pilot Town area, to some extent, they always would call it, he lives down Pilot Town. It's north, so it seems like it would be up.
That's true.
But as you know, when you go in that little curve, it does go down some, so that's probably the reason why it was called down Pilot Town. I often wondered about that. Most of my life was spent on the water and the canal. My uncle had a commercial fishing boat, and of course I was too young to go out on it, but when the boat came in with the nets, I just had to hang up the gill nets. And I remember on the pier there was 10 penny nails to hold the nets. And you're supposed to put 5 loops on each nail, and then go across and put another 5 loops. Well, one day I made a mistake and put 4 up. You can imagine what happened. I had to take all the net back down. Never did that again. But in those years, you know, myself and Timmy and Kenny Booker would take the trout that they wouldn't sell, and it's trout like this, sea trout, and we'd take them all around the neighborhood on a wagon and see if people wanted them. Many times, they said, no, we don't want any more fish today, but there was plenty of fish to give away when I came along. Apparently, my father was a muskrat hunter, because I know in the years when I dig in the backyard, I'll find a muskrat trap. And I understand that's what he did for a living. The other thing, and Reverend Edwards, you might want to hear this, when the fishermen were up at the Presbyterian Church, Cousin Cecil, I called him up the next day and I says, I really enjoyed, you know, about the fishermen. And he said, well, Lewis, your father and your uncle, they worked the boats. They were firemen on those old fishing boats years ago. And I guess they used coal. You wouldn't, Was that true, Reverend Edwards?
Put
Yeah,
it
they
on
were-
in. All right.
So that was a revelation, and several other things they've told me. I had to walk to school, the little brick school you still see there now, every morning. Never was there a day that we didn't go. I don't care how much snow there was, never was closed. And sometimes we'd get a ride with Mr. Albert Scott, and luckily he would come by and he'd take us in his car. But normally we had to walk. And of course, coming home it was harder because of the northeast wind coming. So we used to have to walk with our back to the wind all the way down. The things that went on at the little school, like Professor Blackburn, the magician, we'd all leave Pilot Town, my sister, Judy, her mom, and walk uptown to the school. Well, coming home, of course, there weren't hardly any street lights or anything. We had to come by that cemetery. Of course, I was always fearful of that cemetery. Well, we'd be walking and everything was okay until a piece of paper would blow across. And you can imagine what happened then. We'd all start running. And when I get to my mother's door, I'd bang, let me in. But we were a scary group in those years. But all in all, it was just a beautiful life. I never knew about racial discrimination to the extent that it bothered me. It was just a thing of the times. And personally, I think that if we had the choice in Lewes, there wouldn't have been. There wouldn't have been. Of course, my movements were monitored by the whole town of Lewes. And I used to say, when I get older, I'm going to do something to some of those people. And the older men used to do something called maul in my head. They would, for no reason,
Take
boy,
that, Nora.
I said, I'm going to kill him when I get older. But I loved them. And I remember when I came home, I joined the Navy when I was 17, and you never become a man. And I remember Mr. Babe, he saw me walk by my little white uniform, and he says, boy, I see you grow to that head. The respect that I have for him, I said, yes, sir. But those are the types of things I really cherish today. And they had a lot to do with me. The other expression was, you got to make something of yourself. There wasn't any such thing as hanging around on a corner or anything like that. And that was a part that I heard. The other part was I heard my mother say to one of her relatives walking down New Road, if he don't stop drinking, that alcohol is going to kill him. Well, I'll let you all know I developed alcoholism and nicotine addiction. And those words that my mother said about him resonated in my ears. And then I learned through Alcoholics Anonymous that God could and would if he were sought. And I'm telling you, I went to seek him. But for the grace of God, it's been 40 years for the alcohol and 30-some years for the nicotine. And I used to hear the older people say that God can take the taste out of your mouth. And that's exactly what happened. For me to touch a cigarette or drink any alcohol a day, it would make me definitely sick, just to think about it.
Really?
But you have to surrender. I went through a total surrender process. Not my will, but his will.
Okay.
We all talk about what we're going to do. I'm a witness to it can be done. You have to let him handle it. See, I was in the driver's seat, but I always had accidents.
Yeah.
So I let him take over. And it's been a pleasurable life here in this little town, and it's the only place I thought I'd ever come back to. I met my wife in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We both were teaching school, and she's of course, from Hershey. Her mother's there with us now, and she's my second marriage. And of course, I have a beautiful daughter who's an analytical chemist at Swarthmore College, and she's doing just fine. So I guess I'll be home until the man calls me.
Call you.
Mr. Dorsey, what do you remember about the beach? Is there anything?
Oh,
you
yeah, I
remember
haven't finished yet. Oh, yeah. Well, normally, as a youngster, of course, I had to walk everywhere, you know. And we'd walk to the beach, and this happened many years ago. and I noticed that they would drink up in the pavilion. Of course, as youngsters, we weren't allowed to go up there. It was older people. Because they'd tell you, get up, go back down. You weren't allowed to go up there. Of course, later years, when I got a little older, I was up there too. Because somebody always had a little bottle. And then on one occasion, I don't think there's anybody here remember it. Anyone you might remember it? When we played, I had my little band.
Oh, yes.
I had a band, and we played at the Happy Day Club till it closed, and then went over on the beach and played till the next morning. Till the sun came up the next morning. She remembers that. Yeah. So it's been so pleasurable to grow up in a town like this. I think it's unlike any others. I just moved from over in the Frankfurt-Dagsbar area, and there's just a great difference between the two places. I just hope that the people have moved here, and I suspect that they have sort of coordinated themselves into knowing how we act around here. And so far, I haven't been mistreated. I hope not, because they're going to hear something. Anyway, it's been delightful to invite me this evening. If there's any questions you'd like to ask me, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
You had just talked about the beach a little bit now.
Take your mask off.
Early on, Johnny Walker, did Johnny Walker have that establishment during your time, or was that after?
Oh, no, that was after. That came after.
Okay. There was nothing, so there was no...
There wasn't anything there.
Anything there. Okay.
What was considered a black beach, or they never called it that. We just knew where we belonged.
Sure, sure.
And there was times when we challenged the white beach a little bit. We boys would, and walk
Okay.
kind of close to them and see if they're going to say something.
Now, you grew up on that canal down there, right? With that canal. Now, did you mess around in that canal at all down there?
Every day. Every day. And I used to have to pump out Uncle Roy's boat.
Okay.
He had a commercial fishing boat. And I used to love to pump it out every day.
Okay.
The other thing was amazing, on high tide, your nephew and I and Jimmy Seymour, Donald Dunnan, would get in the middle of the canal with that current and just keep above the water and take us all the way uptown.
Wow.
So we get off around the post office up that area, and then mess around. When the tide went back the other way, we'd go back in and go on home. And the daring thing was to swim the canal. And we did. And there's a woman named Miss Della Wolf who worked along that bank. And before I got home, she told my mom.
Yes.
Of course, after seeing her from the other side, I knew I was in trouble. So I came in the back way through Uncle Roy's yard and climbed on the back and went up into the bedroom. And Mother was down there cooking, starting dinner and everything. And I said, well, maybe she's cooled out a little bit. I guess I ease on down. So I went down and hi, Mom. She didn't say too much. I said, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And I spoke to her again, and she's, bang! But it's well worth it. Well worth it. And she didn't spare the rod, that's for sure. If any of you remember, the worst rod was from an apple tree, because it's got little barbs on the switches.
Right.
And they make whelps on you. But I had a chair I would run and jump in, and the one that had arms on it. So when she come across, I wouldn't get the full hit. So there'd be just little whelps here. But I needed every one of them. She knew what she had raised, she knew the bloodline, and she knew what I needed. God bless her.
Mr. Lawsey, what do you remember about school and going to school in this area? You went to school here, so I'm
Oh,
assuming-
yeah.
so
It's three
what
grades, Miss Davis, Miss Holmes, and Mr. Brown. Now, Miss Davis had 1, 2, and 3. And when we went to her room early in the morning, we had to stand outside, and we had to sing a little song. Good morning to you, good morning to you. We're happy to meet you, we're happy to greet you. Then you could go on in. The other thing I remember is that big green pencil,
Oh, yes.
because she did not spare it. And I mean,
Cracked knuckles?
when we were learning how to put our letters on the line, you couldn't come down just 1 millimeter less. Everything had to be right on the line. And if you didn't, you got the green pencil. So I'm grateful for all that. And I think it was known that kids from Lewes, when they went to Jason, were above many others out of the county. Most of the teachers knew that.
So you went to Jason as well? How'd you get there?
Mr. Harry Burton from Belltown had a bus, and we'd all meet at St. Paul Church every morning.
Now,
And you couldn't cut. Everybody knew. I mean, where you gonna go in the woods? The only place logically you could have gone would have been in the woods, because you couldn't stay out in the open anywhere. Both black and white families would have told on you. That boy wasn't in school today. So
now you picked up kids in Lewis. Now, did you
we picked up kids in Belltown, and then on the right-hand side of Route 9, there's a Metcalf little home there. And we picked up, he had a daughter and a son, and we picked them up there. And I do remember, though, somebody put sugar in his gas tank once. And it took us a long while to get to school. I mean, a long while. We must have been going about 10 miles an hour the whole way. But I really enjoyed growing up in Lewes. I wouldn't have had any other place in Delaware to have grown up in, both from the black and white perspective.
What about your church life?
Oh, church life is something that I had to go to church, sometimes twice a day. And I remember, you remember where the old clothes factory used to be, that one road over there? Now,
Resco Sportswear.
Right. Well, the fishboat men and all used to gamble on that road. And one morning, we were walking, and they probably left some money along the side, because I found $1 and some change and everything. And I was grabbing it and everything, and I thought it was mine. Mom said, "Give me that money." That's the devil's money. and put it in church. Oh, I could have cried. That was the most money I'd ever had. You know, she said it was the devil's money. But had to go to Sunday school, and Mom and them would come into church at 11 o'clock. Well, we boys knew where everyone sat. And when the older women would come in, I'd be sitting in one of their seats. So they would walk in, they'd come right and stand right by the seat. Wouldn't say anything, but I'm supposed to move. And if I didn't, so I said I better move. So the one thing that used to frighten me, which I never understood, "Young man, I'm going to pray for you." I didn't know what that meant. I know I'm by the devil or something's coming. And she said she's going to pray for me. That always frightened me, because I didn't know what it meant.
Now, Lucy, that was at St. George?
Yeah, St. George, yeah. Now, my mother was in the march that went from the old church at the cemetery in 1930-some up to the new one.
There was a church at the cemetery?
Oh, yeah. It's the one that Richard Allen was supposed to have stopped by.
Okay.
And Peter Lewis.
The founder of the AME Church.
And didn't Peter Lewis give the land?
Pardon?
Didn't Peter Lewis give the land for that church?
You have to interpret for me.
She said, did Peter Lewis give the land for that church?
Well, it passed through more than one hand. I think the last person that owned it or had a part of it was Peters, I think. He was a black shipbuilder.
That's Peter Lewis.
Right, that's it,
And
yeah.
I think he petitioned and got part of that land for there. This is going off of Lewis to Milton. You know, that was a shipbuilding community. And of course, when the owner died for years, the black man that worked for him took it over. But there was no mention of him being black. It was just another name. Well, later years, I understand the Historical Society found out that he was a black man. And he built ships also. So there's some areas around Lewes that a lot of you probably don't remember that aren't here now, but I'd love to show you where some of those places are. Now, here's one thing I'd like to share with you. Walking along Pilot Town Road, you'll notice that some of the homes have glass enclosures.
Yeah,
You seen that?
yeah, by the door,
Do you know what they were for?
protect the wind.
Well, when I was going to school, I didn't really know then, but I'd see them standing in those enclosures. And it'd be cold sometime. And then I saw them look over that way, so I looked over that way too. And I'd see the lights flashing in the bay. There was no homes over anything then.
Oh, wow.
There was no homes. Now I could look right over to the bay.
Oh, wow.
And those are the ships that need to go up to Philadelphia, up the river. So the pilots would get in the pilot boat, which was right at the cemetery. That pier right there by the cemetery, that's where the pilot boats would be. And they'd get in those pilot boats and go out and take the
So
ships
that-
up to the Philadelphia.
So that was kind of, so that they could see where they needed to go?
Who?
The pilots, was that because they?
No, they,
lights?
once they got on, yeah, they knew that, yeah, where the location of the ship to take up, yeah.
Okay.
Morse code, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Morse code. That was gonna say, it was the light, they were flashing Morse code,
Yeah.
and so that's.
They
how
would
you know
read it, the
ship-
pilots would
Wow.
read it, and that's how they would know, yeah. And they'd get in those boats right there on Pilot Town Road, and they had pilot right on the side of the boats.
They still do.
Do they?
They still do, yeah.
And they own that land still.
Yeah, they still have
Yes.
that. They keep a boat there sometimes, but
Oh, I
now they
didn't know
mostly
that.
operate right out of next to the ferry.
Oh, okay.
That's
Huh.
where they launch their boats from there now.
Right, isn't that something?
And Lucy, you talked about catching fish, and it seemed that trout were the fish that they were catching then. Now, they would catch them and sell them and then
Oh,
have
yeah.
them left over? Who would they
Yeah.
sell them to?
Oh, yeah, when Uncle Roy's boat would come in, you could always tell if he had a lot of fish in it because it'd be real low to the water. And my mother and Aunt Edith would be down by the pier then. And he had a little 4-cylinder Lathrop engine, it was called. You could hear it, tum, 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 tum. You could hear it when it was coming through the canal. You have something called a cull net. It's metal with holes in it. And those were used to the fish, the larger ones would stay and the small ones would go through the holes. And then they'd box them up in wooden boxes. The ice truck would be down on the pier, and they'd send them off. But all the small ones, me and your nephew would take around the neighborhood. Those are the ones we'd have to pay $5 a pound for now.
Yeah.
More than $5.
They were all free in those years.
Oh, man.
I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you, well, was your favorite thing to eat? What meal did you
Eat?
love the best? Yeah.
Fish.
Well, I mean, how about
And-
dessert?
And the only time I came straight home from school was on a Friday. Because I know Mom would have fish, fried white potatoes and onions, and baked beans and biscuits.
Well, what about
But
dessert?
we ate a lot of fish
What
and a
was your-
lot of beans.
What was your favorite dessert?
It wasn't sweet potato pie like a lot of think. I didn't have a preference. As long as it was sweet, I would eat.
Now, you talked about,
And of course, I got in trouble too. Mom would buy a half of a watermelon. And of course, I grew up with my sister, Emily. And it'd be in an ice box. By the way, we didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. We had an outhouse. That was just common among us. And I didn't know we were poor then. You know, that was commonplace. And Mom would put the half of watermelon in the ice box and cut it in half to quarter. And of course, I would gobble mine up. And then I would go in that house about 4 or 5 times and peep in the ice box. I couldn't take it any longer. I'd take my hand in the middle of hers and snatch the heart out. And run outside and eat it up. When Mom would come home from work, I hear my sister, Mom! I said, oh, Mom. Buzz, it ain't my word now. Another beat. I'd go upstairs again. I'd always head upstairs. And by the way, I remember the end of World War II. I remember at the end of World War II, Burton Dunnan came flying down Pilottown Road, made a right-hand turn on the new road, and ran up on those people's lawn and everything. I remember that. And of course, my mother was an air raid warden. She had a white helmet with the gray webbing inside and a Red Cross on the back. And of course, it was frightening for me to be there by myself because I didn't know what was going on. I knew there was a war, but I didn't know what. And the sirens would go off, and she'd tell everybody to close their blinds and cut out all their lights. That happened many times during World War II.
Wow.
And the other thing about World War II is, at the end of the war, we, the five of us again, would go over to Fort Miles, and those big guns were still sitting there. And we'd climb all over them and everything, but I didn't know if you reached your hand up in there, you got something called Cosmoline on them. And then you'd have to take sand to get it off and everything, but you could smell it. So Mom said, what have you been into? But that was it was just a beautiful thing growing up, going through those experiences. And I would do it all over again if I had that opportunity.
Now, one thing, you talked about fishing. Any crabbing?
Oh, yeah. Bill, in those years, if Mom Annie, your grandma wanted the bushel of crabs, Timmy and I would go down and get them in an hour. You get a bushel an hour, yeah.
Right in the canal then?
Right in the canal, yeah.
How about
But the best, they use chicken today. We never use chicken for crabbing. We use fish heads.
Fish heads.
And let them sit out a day, and they'll come right to them. And then at night now, I used to sell soft shell crabs. I had a boat called a scow, which is a flat bottom boat. And I go along the bank, especially on a moonlight night. And if you look in the reeds, that's where those big softies lie. And I get a bunch of them and sell them. And of course, people that came from Pennsylvania, we also use them for bait. And they just couldn't believe that we were using soft shell crabs for bait. They were plentiful then, you know. And of course, we caught bass and trout and everything right in the canal. Flounder, all those things were in the canal. Yeah. Reverend Edwards, when did you come to Delaware?
I came to Delaware in 1953,
In the 50s, yeah.
in the 50th year. I just listened at you talk because I enjoy just, listening, because it kind of make me go back to when I came to Delaware. Ed Manaway,
I worked for him.
well, he had,
Him and Burton down in the garage down there from Albert Scott, Mr. Albert Scott, yeah.
right, he owned this land out on New Road.
Right.
Well, when I came to Delaware, my wife and I, we decided we would raise some hogs. And we had, so he gave me some land, told me, say, look, bring them out here, and I made a pen, and we had about, I guess, 3 sows, and then a couple more, and then they had the pigs. And I went out one day to feed them. I would get off and work down at the factory,
Right.
to feed them. And one was dead. The hog had blowed up, it was a big hog.
Cholera.
And he said that he thinks somebody came by and looked at him, didn't like the idea of them being there, and they poisoned him.
Oh.
They found out. And when you were talking about Lewes Beach, when I came to Delaware at Lewes Beach, when Johnny Walker had his place, and I had some good friends that were musicians, and you might remember, they came to Delaware, and they had a band, and they wanted to make me their manager, so they would go up to Johnny Walker and play. They had, I think, like a drummer, had 2 guitars, and one played a saxophone. They had a band made up, and they asked me if I would be their manager. That was before I got into the church service.
What was the name of it then? Remember?
the boys all came from down south.
Oh, okay.
Some from Georgia, some from Florida, but they came up to work during the summer, and they formed a band and they played at Johnny Walker's,
Huh.
and they would do that for a while before they left and went back down south. But
It was interesting during those years.
yeah, I enjoy listening to you talk about the things that your growing up life in Delaware, you know, because I've been in Delaware about 6 to 8 years now. I came in 1953, and I've seen a lot, but the things you're telling me really, it's something that's really, you know, you hear people talk about it, but when you've lived through it, it means a lot. You can go back and tell someone how life used to be here, so I enjoy listening to you tell it, you know.
Yeah, the ladies, you're familiar with them, Danielle and Pam. They just gave some recent stats of things that's down in the cemetery. I now have 29 relatives in that cemetery. And of course, with Bill find out perhaps his grandfather is buried there also.
Well, I found
So-
out some Lockwoods in the cemetery.
There's just a list. I think the greatest thing that has happened, this is like a rebirth for me.
Yeah.
Knowing that my relatives have been here a long while. George Riley was born in 1813 and died in 1858. He was buried in that cemetery.
Ain't that something?
And then knowing that Alfred Riley, my great-great-uncle, owned almost all of Park Avenue, including Ship Carpenter Square. And it's documented. We have a copy of the deeds of where he owned that land on Park Avenue.
Ain't that something?
So there's some great things that black folk did in this community
Right.
that weren't recognized. And they thought that we just came here on the fish boats. No, we were here a little bit before. quite,
Yeah.
quite some years before.
Right.
Just
I
one
think the
step away from
Otis Smith,
slavery.
he bought that from another person,
Yeah.
his brother.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I was saying was just kind of just one step away from slavery is where, when you talk about the 1800s,
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. Now, on the other side of my family are Hollands. And we know that slavery existed there, and we've got a copy of his freedom papers. He received his freedom on February the 9th, 1927, 1827. And he married a woman named Cotta Burton, and that's where Burton's Chapel comes in.
Oh, okay.
And the Holland Cemetery is right there with it. That's where the Holland Cemetery is at. And they all lived at Oyster Rocks. And right now, there's 100 and some acres still in the Holland family at Oyster Rocks.
Wow.
What was Mr. Ernest Riley to you? What was he?
Uncle.
It was your uncle.
He had a bunch of kids, didn't he?
Oh.
Now, Lucy, I guess,
Yeah, 13 by the first wife and 3 by the second.
I used to give him he worked down at the factory for
Right,
a few
right.
years. I would give him a ride home, you know, and,
Right.
and he would get off from work, and I'd be talking to you. I said, well, I'll be ready. He said, give me a ride back into Lewes. I said, okay. But then I'd be around talking. He said, well, I'll tell you what you do. Say, pick me up. And he started walking. He said, walk to town. And he told me, pick me up if you get there before I get there. You pick me up.
Yeah,
But he'll
Uncle
keep
Ernest
people
was so
laughing.
mad.
Yeah.
And they said there was competition between Ernest Riley and Ernest Gooch. Between the two Ernest, because they both had,
Competition.
Ernest Riley would have one, Ernest Gooch would have one, on and on. Yeah.
and Lucy, you were talking about Holland. Now, Miss Edith had that catering business, right?
Yeah, she had a catering business, yeah, and Uncle Roy had that, yeah. And of course, there's been some erroneous things said, but I take it in stride. The property across my grandmother's house is still there. And that's where I was born and raised.
Okay.
Right across the street from where your family. But I won't get into others that think that somebody else owned it and all that. And not trying to impress any of you, I must share this with you. Not trying to impress you. I believe in the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I learned that at St. George AME Church. And I remember these words: the truth is the light, and the truth will set you free. Not here, in here.
Right, okay.
And I haven't been to church in ages. No sense of guilt right now, but he knows where I'm at. And the pastor wanted to see me, so I made an appointment to see her. And at the end of the appointment, she said, Lou, I never met a man as honest as you. And the pulpit is yours. In a Lutheran church. So counsel, the truth will set us free in here. That isn't where a country's at, but anyway. So I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you having me speak. I could keep you here all night.
It's so wonderful to hear from you and to talk about, you talked about the truth, talk about really, I think sometimes people think, sometimes as a people that almost that we were hatched. And we have no history and no reference and proximity.
Completely
and we really,
opposite.
really do. It's completely opposite. It really is.
And I think the relationship with blacks and whites in Lewes was exceptional. I don't think you found that many other places.
I really thought
And
so.
now that I think about it, I grew up in a mixed neighborhood. It wasn't considered mixed in, but Uncle Roy and Miss Ruth, Rulani, that white, black,
Well, you look at
all my life.
Mr. Caleb Painter's
Right.
room and house and outdoor ward, all
Right.
that was
All of
mixed.
them.
Yeah, it really was.
And blacks lived there on the beach. Were you all aware where Anglers is at, down that road?
Yeah,
It really was.
I remember that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And there used to be a man called Leon Rowley.
Yes.
He would clean the toilets.
And he had his Delaware clean a long time ago, huh? He really did. I'm gonna tell you. I remember Timmons talking about gated communities, and they were down at the fish rack, and he said we had the first gated community down at the fish rack.
Yeah.
I guess they had a gate you couldn't get in there.
Right.
He said we had the first gated community. That's what he said.
There was a couple times I walked the pier with Otis.
Is that right?
Yeah, I walked down there one day, and I walked all the way down to where the boats were. He wore khakis.
Yeah,
Always wore khakis.
Yeah.
Where it appeared that he was.
And that particular day, when one of the boats came in, they had this big hose that went down right up, and that would suck the fish up.
right.
And the guy would be standing those fish all the way up to his knees.
They call fish bailers. They
Yeah.
bail the fish.
You would know more about it.
Yeah, I did that before,
Oh,
during that
okay.
time.
It's really interesting if someone could see that.
It was amazing how people used to say about how many fish would they have on the boat. I said, I've seen them had so many fish on a fish boat, they put sideboards on it.
My
They
goodness.
build it right up to the top, and that's all you can see from the top. Just cover everything with fish.
My goodness. Because I know Mom would say, when she'd hear the whistle from the boat,
Right.
Mom says, I believe it must be loaded tonight, she said.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad
And
used
the
to
boats would be coming in. Yeah,
My
they're loaded.
dad used to say that the boats were weighted so far down, they
Oh,
would
yeah,
almost be
hardly-
the level of the water.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
that's
That's
right.
true. That is true.
I think it's amazing if you talk about just the courage. And Trina told me that her dad was not a swimmer, but he actually worked on that boat, and
Yeah.
that's amazing because as to where they went. But he's not a swimmer. But I guess just the drive to seek a better way of life.
Her dad told me that his hands would be bleeding here. Would be bleeding. And I said, well, Brownie, what did you do? Yeah, soak them in salt water.
Yeah.
So it was a rough
They're putting
life
those,
that they had
they're
endured.
putting
My
those
dad's
nets
hands
in.
were all big.
Yeah.
That big. We have a question? Okay, we have a
Well,
question.
thanks again.
Oh, it's for Mr.
We
Riley.
have
You
a
got a
question.
question? You got a question? Hold on.
We're being
We're live, so you
televised.
got-
Oh, you're leaving it at that?
Steve Hansel asked, did Mr. Riley mention Caramel?
Camel.
Camel Street,
Oh,
Camel
yes.
Street.
In the Park Avenue, around Park Avenue?
It wasn't Camille Street, that's what they called it, but that wasn't the real name of it. I can show you exactly where it was at. You know where St. George Church is at? Across the road, there was like a little ditch. And that's where chamomile, I didn't know that till I was older. Chamomile, like chamomile tea. And I would run across there, and it had a nice aroma to it when you run through it. So yeah, but they just called it chamomile for short. They didn't call it chamomile. That's the reason it was called Camille Street.
Oh, man.
Now, I don't know if you know it or not, but the field where all those homes are now, they were owned by the Johnsons. Mr. Sam Johnson,
Okay, yes.
Johnny Johnson, and Charlie Johnson. They sold it to a cousin of mine, cousin Winnie, not Winnie, Chubby Holland, who was, what's his son's name? Yeah, to pay for his college, and sold it to Otis Smith. As the story is told, I don't know whether it's true or not. Otis Smith said all they had to pay him was $1 a year,
Ain't that something?
and it wasn't done.
You almost gave it with it.
He had donated that to the black folk in that
Yeah,
community.
right, remember that?
Otis seemed to have
And
quite
lost it.
quite a vision.
We lost it. But we've been here. The word is out now. And I'm gonna help disseminate it even more.
We appreciate you.
You know, a little joke to this. I intentionally went up on 2nd Street and there's a little sandwich shop there. So I sat outside and this older white woman and man came walking by. I don't know why they asked me, "Sir, are you from here?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm from Lewes." So wait a minute, I saw him walk up to, I saw him shake his head. "Yeah, for me."
You gotta throw him off there.
Well, with that. Thanks again, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Anything else,
Yes, that's
gentlemen?
beautiful.
Was that a pleasure?
Wonderful.
I think we really got, received a good history lesson this evening. It was entertaining,
Yes,
yet
yes.
it was honest. So I can appreciate Mr. Lewes Riley and his wife, Miss Lonnie, for taking the time to come out here and be with us, Reverend.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay,
Next meeting.
any questions or comments before we move forward? If not, all minds are clear, everyone happy? So forth, so we will schedule our next meeting, what? is
It will
the-
be next month, the 3rd Thursday in the month. I don't know what date that is. I don't have mine.
Give me 1 second.
Caleb's looking at it.
Third Thursday in March, right?
Yes, 3rd Thursday, it'll be March 17th.
March
Okay.
17th
St.
at 6
Patrick's
o'clock.
Day.
All right, well, if all minds are clear, we'll adjourn.
Make a motion?
Yes?
Make a
Everyone,
motion to
make
adjourn?
the motion. Everyone?
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay.
I
so
second.
Motion and second, that we will adjourn, and we will hopefully see you in March. That's my birthday.
Yeah.
Another year old.